Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second Wednesday program for June. We are especially privileged to have as our speaker tonight Greg Rutledge. Some of you may remember his wonderful program in April about the architecture of West Freemason Street and the West Freemason Street district. By popular request, he is back this evening to talk about the Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach. That's not Norfolk, but technically Virginia Beach used to be part of Norfolk County way back in the 1600s, so we still count it. Most of you who grew up in Norfolk probably remember going down to the Cavalier for wonderful dinners and maybe parties, and the Cavalier Beach Club for the Sunday afternoon tea dances. And how many of you ladies out there learned to dance with your dad in the Sunday afternoon tea dances? There's some great memories. And the Cavalier Hotel was almost lost. It was rescued finally, and Greg Rutledge was hired to assist in the fabulous restoration, which he's going to talk about tonight. Greg is an architect with Hanbury. He specializes in historic restoration and preservation, especially adaptive reuse. He brings buildings back to life. He breathes new life into communities and projects that celebrate our cultural heritage. He's currently working on a variety of projects, including a project at Fort Monroe. And maybe he'll tell us about the moat in a future presentation. Those of you who have been with us before probably already know this, but you will see at the bottom of your screen there is a button for Q&A and another one for chat. You may use either one of those to ask questions throughout the program, and I will collect those, and at the end we will throw them all at Greg and he will answer them for you. So I understand this is going to be a whirlwind trip through a restoration, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So Greg, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Peggy, for that lovely introduction. I'm really delighted to be here again. Let me start my screen share. It's this one, and we'll start it. Slide. Okay, as Peggy said, I'm a restoration architect, and our firm was the architect for the rehabilitation of the Cavalier Hotel. I want to make it perfectly clear from the outset that I did not do this single-handedly. I had a wonderful co-project manager by the name of Richard Rusnak, who I would have lost my mind if he wasn't my co-partner on this project, plus the support of an incredible staff at my firm, Hanbury. And we also had a variety of consultants that on the project that helped us out in all different kinds of aspects, from structural engineering to mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all the basic disciplines you would think of in architecture, down to restaurant designers, food service designers, distillery designers, interior designers, and even, get this, a scent consultant. We had someone who developed a scent for the Cavalier Hotel that is piped into the lobby. So when you walk into the Cavalier Hotel, you are embraced in the smell of, I think they call it lodenberry and pine. It's very distinct. And now that you know it, you'll realize it when you walk through the Cavalier Hotel. We worked on this project for over 5 years. I have the disadvantage of having almost too much information for you. So I'm going to go through this quickly, and hopefully we'll hit the best highlights. But again, it's really hard for me to sort of say, I don't want to talk about this, when I think every bit of this project was absolutely fascinating. It was almost like having 10 projects in one, all rolled in together. So let's start with just a little bit of background. Construction began in 1926. And it opened on April 4th in 1927, and it immediately became one of the most premier hotels on the East Coast all the way up until World War II. And one of the reasons it was really well known was because on the weekends, on Saturday nights, It would host the biggest names in entertainment, the big bands, and the famous stars of the day, and broadcast those concerts on WSCA radio from the hotel. So the Cavalier Hotel is widely known because of these big bands, and it was so popular and so well known that you could actually catch what they called the Cavalier Express in Chicago, a train that would take you straight from Chicago to the doors of the Cavalier Hotel. It also hosted many celebrities over the years, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who legend says he wrote The Great Gatsby while at the Cavalier Hotel, but that's just legend. There's a lot of legends around the Cavalier Hotel, and presidents as well. And another legend is that Richard Milhouse Nixon may have burned the Watergate tapes in the Hunt Room fireplace. Again, the Cavalier is full of legends. This is the group of men who dreamt up the project. They actually thought about building a new resort hotel as early as 1913 when the Princess Anne Hotel burnt down. But it wasn't until the 1920s, early 1920s, when some infrastructure improvements, such as the roadway of the Virginia Beach Boulevard was constructed, and the new water main was constructed to the oceanfront, that it made the possibility of building a grand hotel, a grand destination hotel possible. This gentleman right here with the glasses is Clarence Neff, a Norfolk-based architect. So Peggy, there is a Norfolk connection to this. And you may be very familiar with his buildings because they're scattered all throughout Norfolk in a variety of designs, from neoclassical to Art Deco, Art Moderne, as you can see with the what is now the Harrison Opera House. He was a classicist by training and by trade, and most of his buildings are classically oriented, including the Cavalier Hotel. Here's a photograph of it under construction. It was constructed on the top of a natural sand dune overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. I'm assuming this is when they're starting to put the foundations in the building. I got to tell you, we dug and we dug and we dug and we dug and we dug in the basement of that building, and we never found the foundation. It is sitting on some concrete piles or concrete piers that go way down. But that's fortunate because we never found any sort of settlement failures. We found all sorts of other kinds of failures in the building as we progressed through the project. And one of them was the structural steel frame. It was built in the 1920s with a technique of construction called modern fireproof construction. So the building has a structural steel frame that is encased in masonry, terracotta blocks and brick masonry for fire protection. And this ultimately became the building's downfall. And we'll talk about that a lot more in a few more slides. Here's a beautiful view of it shortly after completion. You can see its commanding presence on that hill overlooking the Virginia Beach oceanfront and the terrace lawn going down to the beach club, which would be at the end of the lawn right on the oceanfront. As I mentioned, Neff was a classicist, and he drew heavily upon Virginia precedents for the Cavalier Hotel. It's almost like walking through the history of Virginia as you enter the hotel. When you approach the hotel, you're in the motor court, and it's flanked by serpentine walls that are replicas of the walls at the University of Virginia. The front portico, the main portico of the hotel, is a replica of a portico at Monticello. The rotunda, the rosette, the plaster rosette in the rotunda is an exact replica, albeit a much larger version of the plaster rosette that's in the ceiling of the Moses Myers House in downtown Norfolk. And the paneled lobby is reminiscent of any of the great Georgian houses in Virginia, such as Stratford Hall. So you really do get a beautiful slice of Virginia history as you enter this building. It is also encrusted with just about every form of architectural decoration you can imagine. And all of this architectural ornamentation was constructed out of a new material called cast stone. It was a modern material in the 1920s, which is basically a newly developed process for casting concrete to imitate limestone. So other than the granite steps and the granite keystone in the building, all that stonework you see on the Cavalier Hotel is actually a man-made material which has its own physical properties and problems as it ages. It was constructed in a crazy Y-shaped floor plan when the Art Deco age, so buildings are taking on these wonderful shapes. But I really think Neff was trying to take advantage of the ocean views. The Atlantic Ocean is to the left of this floor plan, so you can see the majority of the rooms have a view out to the ocean and to capture the sea breezes. So I believe that was his reasoning behind this plan. That Y-shaped plan translates down into the first floor in three major rooms. The dining room on the south wing, which was called the Pocahontas room, which is now called the Becca dining room. the lounge, which is the Raleigh room, which is the east-facing room to the east porch in the Atlantic Ocean, and the ballroom, which is in the north wing. The lobby connects all these rooms right at the crux of the Y, and the wings are surrounded by these porches, these beautiful porches with their arcaded fronts, and a loggia that connects back to the lobby, which encloses the indoor pool. Fortunately, that historic floor plan configuration remained when we started the project in 2013. You can see here we have the dining room still in the Raleigh room. The ballroom had been altered. The kitchen had been added on to a couple times. A new ballroom had been constructed, and the old ballroom had been altered to create a connection from the lobby to the new ballroom and the possibility to create smaller ballrooms here. But that was the only plan configurations that were, and a couple other things. Yeah, here's the ballroom configuration and the vending area in the Raleigh room. But other than that, the floor plan was intact, and fortunately, I'd say 90% of the historic materials, the wood paneling, the terrazzo, and all the plasterwork and woodwork was intact and in decent shape. So that was to our advantage. So in 1942, the hotel was commandeered by the Navy and used as a sonar training school. And after the war, it was reverted back to private property, but it went on a long, slow decline. In 1973, the new Cavalier Hotel across Atlantic Avenue was constructed. That is this tower in this photograph right here, and this is the Beach Club. And the old hotel closed, but for only a short period of time, because in 1976, it was partially renovated and it reopened. However, in 2012, after a long dispute among the family that owned the hotel and a couple of other major resources about who owns what, who gets the profits off of what, they couldn't resolve that. The hotel went into receivership and was forced to be sold at auction with absolutely no caveats whatsoever that it had to be restored. And in fact, the land that the Cavalier set upon was divided into 4 parcels of development. You could bid on 1 or all 4. Again, there was no stipulation that the hotel had to remain. And of course, with the zoning that was applied, 3,000 condominiums would be much more advantageous financially than a 100-room hotel. So it really looked like the Cavalier Hotel was going to be lost. It didn't look like there was going to be any way to save it. However, there was a groundswell and the Historic Preservation Commission in Virginia Beach, and they convinced the city to come up with some very lucrative incentives for anyone to bid on who bid on the Cavalier with the promise of restoring it. They could take advantage of those incentives. That also included historic preservation tax credits on top of that. So it made for a very viable financing package to restore the hotel. And fortunately, in 2013, a local company, Cavalier Associates LLC, bid on all 4 properties and were successful with the bid with the promise to restore the hotel, and they kept their promise. And in 2014, although the hotel had previously been accepted as to be listed on the National Register, the formal listing on the National Register was completed, and the building was included in the National Register in 2014. So that got us up to the point where we started our work on the project. We did some preliminary work for Mr. Thompson to help him understand what he was getting into, because he had never taken on a restoration project of this magnitude, or any restoration project for that matter. So we were very upfront about what he was getting himself into, because it was in really, really rough shape. So here's just some photographs of it in 2013, right after the closing. This is the lobby looking back toward the entrance, turning 180 degrees, looking back toward the checkout area and toward the dining room entrance at the far end of the lobby. Here's the Raleigh room, just an absolutely lovely room with beautiful millwork and plasterwork, but just, it just looks tired and old. And all of that exterior ornament that looked fantastic from the ground, when you got up close, you could see that 80 years of weathering and erosion had taken away a lot of its detail, and in many places it was absolutely failing to the point where some serious restoration work needed to be done to the material. So it was rough. And then I mentioned the structural steel frame, which is right behind the masonry veneer. Water had been able to get through that masonry veneer into the structural steel frame, and of course it was rusting, and when steel rusts, it expands, and this steel was expanding at an alarming rate, putting an incredible stress on the skin of this building. So at every corner of this building that was being torn apart by the structural steel frame, it's massive cracks that went vertically all the way down through the materials. This is a serious condition. And also with the cast stone being a fairly new material, an experimental material, really. How it weathered was unknown, so we were losing, the faces of the cast stone, major cracks in the cast stone, and even large sections of the cornice were lost, which is a very dangerous thing because in a few minutes I'll show you where we did some exploratory surgery on the cast stone cornice. These pieces are not small. They are extraordinarily large and very, very heavy. Just a couple more pictures of the condition of the cornice work. You see the spalling of the material here and some previous repairs that actually accentuated the failure of the material by capturing water. And then the balustrades on the parapet, it's just basically old age is all you can account for, old age in the hot, harsh environment at the ocean front. So here's a photograph of the new owners. The gentlemen to the left are the new owners, and here's representatives of the city. Of course, the lawyers are on the right, and their promise to restore the hotel. And God bless them because they stuck to it, and it was a difficult project for them, and financially as well as emotionally, because it took a lot longer than any of us ever thought because of what we kept uncovering when we were trying to get the hotel back on track. So let's start with a little bit of investigation. Like I said, we did some initial investigation for Mr. Thompson prior to the purchase, but afterwards we had to really dig in and see where we're getting, what was really underneath what we couldn't see. We had no drawings of the hotel whatsoever. None of Clarence Neff's drawings could be found. And you would think of a building of this popularity, and it had been published in architectural journals, you would be able to find some existing documentation. So we had to measure and document everything. All the floor plans, all the historic fabric, all the molding profiles, all the woodwork profiles, everything. So we would have documentation of what we would need to do if we needed to repair or replace in kind with a new material, so we could put this out to bid and get competitive bids on the project. It was an extraordinarily complex and lengthy process to get all this information onto paper. However, on the exterior, we did use a new technique called laser scanning. We had a company come out and set up some lasers and scan the exterior because I was terrified to have my folks dangle off the roof or try to climb ladders of a 7-story building to get exterior measurements. So we scanned it with lasers. The technology produced what they call a point cloud. Basically, it's just a bunch of dots that you can actually move around in 3D. The file was so large that we could not load it onto our office's server without crashing our server. So we had to get them to dumb the file down to about 10% of its original capacity. And then we did our exterior elevation drawings based on that point cloud. In hindsight, I wish I'd hired that company to do our base drawings, but we had new technology. We wanted to try it out and see what we were capable of. But it really did help on the exterior of the building to get all that, all those cornice dimensions and things like that. Meanwhile, our structural engineer was going through, the hotel was still open and still renting out rooms, but the top floors were closed because of all this water damage that was coming in from the balustrades and the roof. And our structural engineer was able to go up to those floors, cut some exploratory holes, and see what the condition of the steel is. And you can see here, we've lost the entire flange of this structural column right at its foot where it meets the floor. Same conditions here, little less you can see. But you can see how the rust is actually just sort of carved away at these columns, making them to the point where they are unsound. And I jokingly said to our structural engineer, it's like, Dave, I think this building has transitioned from a steel structural frame to a masonry bearing wall. He said, you're probably right. So this was a real challenge. They documented all the places where the steel needed to be repaired. The red dots are bad, the green dots are good. They did it on every floor. Then they came up with a plan of how to repair this structural steel from the inside, because we weren't about to touch the exterior skin to cut that open to put the steel in. Plus, we could not take out any of the structural steel that was there because there was no way to shore up the building. So basically, the old steel had to remain, and we had to come up with a way to make all of that redundant by putting new columns beside it. So then we had to figure out, how is this water getting into the columns? Okay, so the way the wall is constructed, and this is called a mass masonry wall, which is very typical of this era. There's a layer of brick, a parge coat behind the brick, a terracotta block, which is the fireproofing, and on that terracotta block is the plaster interior finish. So you have a massive masonry that's about 14 inches thick. And this wall is designed to take on rainwater that gets onto it, absorb it, and then wick it out when it's not raining. So it's always in sort of a state of constant flux of being wet and dry. And that's perfectly okay. That's the way this wall is designed. However, in this design, our structural steel frame was right behind the 4 inches of brick masonry, and that water was getting through the brick masonry to the steel. So we did a water test. This incredibly elaborate contraption is a water test, and we tested it in several different areas around the hotel's perimeter. And we cut portals in the walls so we could see what was happening to the backside of the brick. And this is a great example. Here you see the backside of the brick with its parging. This is the terracotta block right here, and of course the plaster finish. Well, one of our tests, and this is our masonry expert, Christine Reynolds from Washington, D.C., who we brought in to help us determine what was going on. Well, in one of our tests, as soon as they turned the water on, before Christine could leave the room to get her notebook to make observation notes, it started pouring through like this. So we knew we had a pretty drastic problem, but we didn't know what. And the only way to know that was to cut the mortar joints out of the building. Now, this mortar is Portland cement mortar, which means it is hard as concrete. We could not make it budge by using anything like chisels or any kind of hand tools. So I allowed the masons for these small areas that we're doing tests on to cut the mortar joints out with a saw, with a skill saw and a head saw, something I rarely ever allow a mason to do because of the potential damage to the brickwork. And what we found was we had not really failures, but we had weak head joints randomly throughout the entire facade of the building. And it's basically because when the masons laid the bricks, they fully bedded the bed joint, which is this horizontal joint. You can see it's solid. But when they laid the bricks, they basically just took a small amount of mortar and what we call buttering. They buttered the edge of it and set it in there. So we had a bunch of very, very fragile head joints around the building. So that took us off on a course of basically eyeballing the building, the entire exterior skin of the building by swing stage scaffolding over a period of a couple of years, finding all of these suspected head joints, cutting them out and repointing them. A long, drawn-out process of research and documentation. But that was the best way we knew to secure the exterior facade of the building, because we knew we couldn't repoint the entire facade because we would do more damage than good because of the type of mortar that was being used. And of course, the cost of that would have been so prohibitive, it would have just been extraordinary. So here's that cornice we were talking about. We took a piece of the cornice out to see how it was attached and what was holding it on. And much to our surprise, we found absolutely nothing. What looks like pins here holding in place is actually the rebar of the concrete slab of the roof, and these are the reinforcing bars of the precast concrete piece that we chipped away. So this is the big block. It's about 7 feet long in this direction, about 4.5 feet tall in this direction, sitting on this little precipice here, and the weight of the parapet is what holds it in place. That is it. That was really scary for us. So we came up with a plan of how to repin those, resecure those, and make sure they don't fall on anyone, because that could kill you, and also which ones we needed to replace, because some of them were so badly damaged that we could not repair them. We also had to do all sorts of material testing for the Department of Historic Resources, primarily because this project was getting historic preservation tax credits, and we had to prove that we were doing the most sensitive methods possible so we would not damage any of the substrate materials. So here's a test of getting paint off of masonry, because most of the interior porches walls were painted, and I wanted to get them back to natural masonry because from this historic photograph, that's what they were. So here we are in the Riley Room porch. It was painted white. That was our first test. It came off beautifully, and it came off the entire porch beautifully, and we were tickled to death. This was the only place that happened. We pulled our teeth getting that paint off the brick everywhere else in the building, and I have no idea why. It was so easy. It's so easy in the Raleigh room and so difficult in all the other porches. But it was just a painstaking process to get that paint off of that masonry. We also had to demonstrate that our craftsmen were up to snuff to do these repair work. So we got our mason to come out and to take a previously altered window into a door. You can see this new brick surrounding it, to take that brick out. So we got back to the original brick fabric, and then using some salvage brick, rebuild it. And you can barely tell it was touched. So here's the rebuilt part. and here's the original part. So we knew our craftsmen were up to the task, because we knew we were going to be taking apart a lot of the masonry corners and putting them back together, and we wanted this kind of outcome for the final product. Meanwhile, our structural engineer was coming up with this crazy ideas for how to reinforce the structural steel frame, and I'll show you examples of that as well. So, construction process or construction progress. One of the first things we did, and this was a big decision, because the balustrades, the parapet and the balustrades was such a character-defining feature of this neoclassical building, but they were in such terrible shape. Now we need to get the building waterproofed. We need to get it, watertight, so we can do work on the inside while we're doing work on the outside. And we also need to be able to hang off the building on these structural scaffoldings hung by a structure that we need to put on the roof. So we made the decision to remove all the balustrades and parapets off the building and get a flat roof, design a davit system, which is a support system to hang the scaffolding off, and then put temporary roofs on in their place. Again, the material was deteriorated to the point that we really couldn't salvage it, and the repair process of it would have been, it wouldn't have been a good permanent repair to end up with. And this also gave us a cache of brick to use for a sort of a backup cache of historic brick in case we needed it somewhere else, because we could take all the brick from the parapet and use that for restoration purposes. And then when we rebuilt the parapet, we could rebuild the face of the parapet in the historic brick with a modern brick backup, so the aesthetic would remain the same. So we took off a couple of structurally suspect additions on the back. I wanted to take off more, but we didn't want to lose that real estate because of the tax credits. If you took something off, you couldn't build it back and get tax credits for it. So we took off the ones that we were scared of, and then our primary focus was getting the building skin and the hotel watertight. The structural steel was in way worse condition than we anticipated. You can see this is a corner column that totally rusted away, and you can see this is the expansion of that steel in the wall. This should be only 3/8 of an inch thick, and it's expanded to 1.5 inches. So you can imagine the pressure that was putting on the masonry. We kept coming up with all sorts of different field conditions that we had to customize structural solutions for, and these had to be fabricated in the field, custom made with steel pieces that we would bring out and cut with torches and fit into place. And unforeseen conditions were almost a daily occurrence, such as the reconstruction of the Cavalier Suite, which was an early addition to the hotel over the end of the ballroom, which when we took the finishes out, we discovered it was not pinned to the building in any way, form, or fashion, and therefore structurally unstable, and we had to reconstruct that. But we salvaged the brick, we salvaged the cast stone, and we reused that in the reconstruction of the Cavalier Suite. We had hidden structural failures, such here's a beam where the web is rotted out to the point where the beam is no longer functioning properly. And then we had material failures. We had plaster work that we thought would be intact, but when we really started to work on it, it would lose its keying and fall out on us. And this is primarily due to age more than anything else. The building at this point was almost 90 years old. And partial building failures. We had a partial failure of the ceiling of the Raleigh room on a weekend, thank goodness, because this is a concrete slab with the plaster on it, and it just fell to the floor. And then when we were driving the piles for the parking garage, one of those additions that I originally wanted to take off buckled on us, and we had to end up taking that down. So in the end, not to my happy satisfaction, but I got rid of that addition that I didn't want on the building anyway. And then there was just complex reconstructions of architectural features. As I mentioned, the corners of the building were just under such a tremendous amount of stress from that structural steel frame that we basically had to unzipper them, fix the steel, protect the steel, and then close them back up. So here's a photograph of it under construction. Here's another one, and you can see it's just the incredible variety of all the work going on all at the same time. Here's that corner that we took apart so we could fix the steel frame and fix the coins that are on the corner. We're doing the same thing here on this inside corner of the tower. We have the portico under restoration. We've got the windows under restoration for the pool. We're working on the roof and the front facade of the east porch over here. We're rebuilding the retaining wall that holds the north end of the terrace lawn, and we're reconstructing the Cavalier Suite. So, I mean, we're talking several different varieties and scales of projects going on simultaneously throughout this entire project. One of the things we spent a lot of time with, a lot of tender loving care, was the front portico, because this is your first impression of the Cavalier Hotel. And someone well-intentioned decided it needed to be polychromed when originally we know it wasn't. It was all sort of to be natural limestone. Now, keep in mind, this is all cast stone. None of this is actual limestone. It's all a formed concrete. And we knew it was not painted colors because here's a photograph when the hotel opened in 1927. So we started stripping the paint off, and we used peel away. And I wish I had stock in peel away. I would have made a fortune off the dividends from all the amount we bought. We peeled away, and peeled away until we got to this. Not satisfactory for me. So we went one step further. Again, this is a technique that I don't recommend people doing to masonry because it's something that could be very damaging very fast. But we used some mild abrasive, and we used ground up corn cobs, which is kind of like bird feed oatmeal, so to speak. It is very soft, and you can use it as an abrasive. Sandblasting is the technique, but it is abrasive in the blasting technique, and to strip the paint off of cast stone and brick. But you still have to be very careful around these decorative ornaments. Like you can barely see this wreath that's so covered over in paint that you don't do any damage to that. So it was a highly monitored technique and a process to make sure we weren't doing any damage to the substrate and stopping at the last paint layer. And that got us to here, which I was still not very thrilled with. So we said, we're going to do something extraordinary. We're going to coat these columns because, again, this is your introduction to the Cavalier Hotel, and they're going to be pristine. So we put a light parge on the columns to get them to where they would be in the best shape possible. And then we recoated the rest of the portico with a breathable masonry sealer that was limestone in color. So it emulated the original limestone color. And that got us to a point where I was happy with the aesthetic of this rehabilitated portico. So that's just a brief sort of run through of the kind of steps we went through on almost every process here to get this right. The cupola was a mystery to us. We had no idea how it was put together. We had no idea if it was a structural frame inside it. So we had Christine Reynolds, our masonry expert, scan it, and there was no structural frame to it whatsoever. These were just giant blocks of cast stone in various degrees of failure. This major spalls where you can see the reinforcing inside. The whole corner is just deteriorated. We have rust coming through the ceiling on this panel, and some more spalls here. So this is just sitting here. And my plan was to basically take it down stone by stone, see what we could salvage, recast what we needed to, and build it back. The general contractor said, no, we can scaffold it and we can work on it in place. So our structural engineer came up with several different concepts to brace this thing because he was afraid of the next great Virginia earthquake would probably make this thing topple to the ground. So I was never happy with the solutions, but this was the best one. This is one that does two things for us. It gives an X brace here that holds the cupola in place, plus gives us a sort of a railing in case somebody comes up there, they can't fall over the edge and down 7 stories to the ground. If I didn't tell you this was there, you probably wouldn't even notice it because it's really very unintrusive, and only when the sunlight hits it at a right angle that you can see it. So this was one of the best solutions we had. It was the best solution we could come up with, and I'm comfortable that the cupola is now in place, and we were able to go back with our restoration techniques to restore the stone in place. And speaking of restoring the stone in place, this is the eastern facade. This is the east porch, and this is actually cast concrete on the first floor, not cast stone. But these are the guys who are working on it, and they are like artisans. And this really it's like painting with sculpting clay. We had to do, again, mock-ups and tests of all these kinds of repairs. So here on the corner, here's our granite cornerstone. It says 1607 on the south and 1627 the day the hotel opened on the east. Here's our cast stone coins, and here are 2 repairs. The top one is a really nice repair in terms of color, but this cast stone has got little comb marks in it, what we call striations, and it's a terrible match in that texture. The bottom one is a really great match in texture because you can see the fine vertical lines. It's a horrible match in color. So there's always this sort of balancing act of color and technique and the application that we were constantly refining and working on because this color of this cast stone changed as you went around the building because of its different exposures to the sunlight over the years. And these guys were extraordinarily artisans, and you could see the things they were trying to grapple with, missing pieces of the column capitals, giant spalls and cracks in the concrete work, and even places that we had to cut out and cast new concrete and put back in to create the bottom of this lintel. And they worked on that so diligently all the way around the hotel. And we finally got to the point where it looked like this. And I was just thrilled to death. I mean, this was just the best outcome that we could come up with that I could ever anticipate. And they just did a stupendous job. We had amazing craftsmen on this project. So it went from looking like this to looking like this. And this is also a mock-up for the new doors we wanted to install, because at one point, some of the porches were open air, but some of them had enclosures. These were enclosures that were installed. We had no idea when, but they were bifold doors. They couldn't even secure them. You could see sort of like a bar on the backside to try to keep them closed. But we wanted to come up with a similar concept with a pair of doors that the hotel could open and have these porches back to open air whenever they wanted to, when the weather was nice. So this was our mock-up for that. And we had to do these series of mock-ups for historic resources for just about every undertaking we did on the hotel. The downspout, though, was temporary. That is not a permanent markup, so don't look at that. We had it a little better up in the tower. So up in the tower, the east wing and the north wing, this plan faces, the north faces south in this plan. Those two wings had been renovated several times in the past, probably in the 76 renovation and the 1990s renovation. And the hotel originally had over 200 rooms, and I think it had 150 when we started our project. So what they did was they combined these two rooms into one and one bathroom, two bathrooms into one, because the original rooms were tiny. They're like 12 by 12. And the bathrooms were like 5 by 7. These weren't luxurious suites by any means. But what was really cool was your bathroom had a saltwater faucet for your bathtub. So you get salt water straight from the Atlantic Ocean piped into your bathtub if you want to take a saltwater bath. And that tower at the top of the building held a giant water tank that they would put ice in. It was ice water, and you had an ice water tap on your sink, so you get ice water drawn from the water tower. So they had a couple of cool features. So we took this to historic resources. These wings had been altered quite a few times over the years, even though they were nice, nice fixtures, nice bathrooms. It was okay. Terrible hallways. This made The Shining look like it was an enjoyable place to go. It was just really, really creepy. But they gave us permission to go ahead and gut the tower, since it's been altered so many times over the past, and create the best hotel experience we could. But their only stipulation was that we had to maintain the circulation corridor, which we had to. There's no other way to get around it. And to maintain and restore the historic cores of the building, which we were going to do anyway, but was a bit problematic because you can see how close they are, and they do not meet the current building code in any terms or fashion for separation of exits. So we had to work with the building inspectors to mitigate this sort of situation, working under the historic building code. But we were able to retain and restore the historic cores of the building. So here we are. We were gutting up the floors, which gave us a great opportunity to do that structural steel framing work. And here's just a few examples of how that manifested itself. You can see this sort of tree-like thing coming down this is where the good steel ended, or started, I should say. Bad steel went up. So this is the new structural steel frame, making this column redundant. And here's another example where this column makes that column redundant. And these two are carrying the load down to ultimately one of these V-shaped things. And in some places we had to take it all the way down to the foundation, the bearing point on the foundation that we could find. And just a couple more examples of some, the crazy things that we had to do and crazy situations that we had to come up with to make this structural steel frame work inside the building. But we eventually got to the point where we were reconstructing the rooms, reconstructing the corridors, and this is getting close to finish here, which looks a whole lot better than this. We were delighted to be able to get the ceilings back up to a more original height, and get the mechanical equipment out of the ceilings of the corridors, and get a much nicer experience as you go to your rooms than these really, really creepy corridors that were there before. During all of this construction, our client said, wouldn't it be cool if we had a distillery in the building? And wouldn't it be cool if the distillery was like right in the middle of the building? And we said, yeah, that'd be really neat. Let's put an explosion-based use right in the center of the hotel, not only in the center of the hotel horizontally, let's do it right underneath everything as well. Hey, great. Well, here's how it turned out. We actually put a distillery in this hotel. We think it's the only hotel that has a distillery in it. It was actually a fascinating project on its own. The distillery went in where the historic, I don't know if you call it historic, but where the laundry plant used to be. And the laundry plant was classified as an industrial use. Well, a distillery is an industrial use, so we weren't changing out the occupancy. So therefore, it would work within the building code to have a distillery in this location in the hotel. Above it was the main kitchen for the hotel, this is before we restored the kitchen. Below it was the main mechanical plant for the hotel. This was the hotel's incinerators, and you can see the circle back of the back. This was the hotel's original main boiler to supply all the hot water for the radiators. This was underneath where we wanted to put the distillery. I don't know if you know anything about distillery processes, but it's sort of a gravity process. So everything comes in high and works its way down to the still. Okay, so a flat plate floor wouldn't work. So we cleared out the laundry room. This is the view basically from the hunt room toward the laundry room. And then we cleared out the floors. And then we cleared out the structure. Now keep in mind, we're doing work overhead on the kitchen and the roof and work all around this while we're basically restructuring the center of the building during the construction process. And getting in new columns, new floors that are the step down levels, so this process could work. And then the equipment started coming in. But the bane of my existence was this vodka tower, which was 20 feet tall. We had floors that were 11 foot tall from floor to floor. The vodka tower had to be 20 feet tall. It couldn't be broken into two pieces. So in great Cavalier fashion, it came in one single piece. It had to be lifted to the center of the building blindly by a crane who couldn't see it. It could only be guided by walkie-talkie into a 5-foot hole in the center of the roof of the back of the building. Perfect. This is basically how everything happened at the Cavalier. Nothing was easy. The hunt room, I always told my employees that if we screw up the hunt room, our name would be Bud. It was probably one of the last rooms of the hotel to remain open to the public. It's an iconic room that everybody in the north end of Virginia Beach loved and just spoke of graciously. And that fireplace was probably the most iconic element of the room. Huge fireplace, almost tall enough you could stand up in. And when we took the paneling off to restore it, lo and behold, we found out the fireplace had shifted, had settled, and pulled itself away from the exterior wall of the north wing to a degree that these openings, and these are in the smoke chamber, mind you, are big enough you can put your arm through all the way up to your shoulder, and these are in the firebox. It's amazing that this, at some point, some ember hadn't been able to waft over here, get to that paneling, catch it on fire, and burn it down. We had no choice. We couldn't shore it up. We couldn't push it back into place, and we didn't even know if it had a foundation. So we did extraordinary documentation, the masons more than I did, on the dimensions, the size, the shape, the form, everything about this fireplace. And the masons took it down, brick by brick, row by row, took the bricks down, every course one at a time, set it on a pallet in the way they came out, and set that pallet aside. And they worked their way down. We put in a new foundation. There wasn't one. And then they built it. They reversed the process and built it back. So every brick you see there is in the original location it came from. It was extraordinarily meticulous work. It took about 3 months to do it. And the masons were just extraordinary craftsmen and reconstructed this thing identical to what it was before we had to take it down, except now it's structurally sound. The pool was another great challenge. Here's a pic. I'm not exactly sure when these photographs were taken. I think in the 1930s, but you can see it has this beautiful ceiling configuration over the loggia and a wonderful truss and skylight over the pool. And just beautiful polychromy and beautiful scenes, I'm sure, of the Virginia Blue Ridge murals on the wall. Well, this is what it looked like in 2013. It lost all of its character. Its ceiling had been lowered to the point where it's infringing upon the work of the Raleigh Room, the willwork of the Raleigh Room stores. The truss was enclosed, and it just had lost all of its character. It was sad, absolutely sad. And then there's other curiosities like, what is this? What is this thing coming from the basement? It was a water hose connected to the main water line coming into the building running 24/7 to keep water in the pool, to keep the pool filled. The pool was leaking so badly, and we had no idea where this water was going, that they had to keep that water hose running to keep water in the pool. And there was a couple of fairly major cracks, which we knew that's where the water was going, but where it went and what was underneath it, we had no idea. So we were faced with some reconstructing a pool within the pool, rebuilding the pool deck. So the pool that's there is with a pool within the old Cavalier pool. It's a little smaller, a little shallower, unfortunately, but it retains the original configuration of the pool. But the main thing is that we were able to restore the volume of the room, and I'll show you some photographs of that in a second. There are 9 arched windows on the pool loggia on the north side of the building. These were like a master class in window restoration. We had every known sort of wood rot failure and every known wood restoration techniques used on these windows to restore them. There are 9 of them. It took 9 months to restore them. Overall, we stripped them down to bare wood. We repaired the wood, doing all varieties of consolidation techniques, and reglazed and reputtied them. You can see in this photograph, this window right here, we had to actually reconstruct this arch piece because it failed so badly. And the end window, the last window here, we had to reconstruct from scratch because we just couldn't salvage it. But again, this was like a master class of every technique that you could use in window restoration. Here's another view in progress. Here we are getting close. All we have to do is get the casement windows put back into place. And here they are finished. They are extraordinary. These are the original windows to the hotel. They operate. The casement windows operate. They open inward, and this actually round transom will drop down also. So these windows can be opened, and when weather is good, they open these windows. They open the doors to the dry room. They open the doors to the porches and capture that sea breeze all through the first floor of the hotel. The mechanical system hates it, but when they do it, it's fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous. You feel like you're in the 1920s again. The other part of the pool was the skylight. It was in such terrible shape that replacement was the only thing we could do. There was no way we could restore this. It was basically not even tempered glass, laid upon each other like pieces of shingles, held together by these little aluminum battens and screws. And there's so much of it that was rotted and deteriorated. I just could not see any conscionable effort to restore this. We discussed this with Historic Resources at length, and they finally agreed that if we went back with a skylight that replicated the skylight identically, retaining the structural steel frame, all the trusses, the purlins, that would be acceptable because we were doing so much else in the pool to recapture the historic volume of the room. So these are just some photographs of that work underway. Here I am with the skylight finally installed. This is one of my happy moments. It just looks fantastic. Not only one to get that skylight there, but to see the original truss framing, and it's all painted white like it should be instead of that hideous dark black. But we had some good discoveries during our work in progress that were heart-lifting. So one of them was in the ballroom, and I was always interested in the ballroom because we had this diagram showing the ballroom had a rounded end on the east end, but it had been altered through the years to create this corridor to connect to the new ballroom and some pre-function areas. And there's basic little remnants of it here and there, but it was mostly totally concealed. And I thought the rounded end of the ballroom was lost. But when we took out all of the stuff that was done, we think in the 1950s, lo and behold, we had the round cornice still there, in place, intact, column capitals, some pilasters, so we knew exactly how to reconstruct the rounded end of the ballroom. And here you see that entire round cornice that was still there. This was the part that was encapsulated that we knew nothing about. So here it is in restored fashion, just prior to reopening. So that was a wonderful discovery. Another one was in the lobby. We know the lobby had been altered heavily. We knew that they had these really large openings in this paneled wall on the east. Those had been closed up, changed, and of course, the panel work on this wall was in deplorable condition because of the water damage coming in from overhead. This is the only paneling in the lobby we replaced. All the other paneling in the lobby were restored. We had to dismantle this wall, and when we did, we were able to see the framing for those original openings. So we knew what those were like, and we were able to restore them back to their original configuration. So that was a nice discovery. And then in the Raleigh room is one of my favorite rooms because it is just full of really beautiful woodwork, plaster work, and of course that wonderful terrazzo floor. The restoration techniques to retain all of this incredible plaster work and ornamental work, all in place while we did it. We're just fantastic. The workers were just so careful and so attentive to what they were doing, especially around the fireplace. And that terrazzo floor, it polished up beautifully. It looks like a brand new floor. I was just stunned at how beautiful the terrazzo turned out. And we lost a little bit of the plaster because we lost the plaster ceiling. So you can see here the columns are getting new plaster cornices that are molded off of the historic plaster cornices. And I tell you, I could watch ornamental plaster work being done all day long, every day. To me, it's just a fascinating trade and one I have no experience or skill in whatsoever. But the people who do it are so talented, so talented. So the results, was it worth it? We thought it would be a 2-year construction project. It turned out to be 4. We thought it would cost about $40 million. So it was 2 years, then 4 years, $40 million. Just take a guess at what you think the final total was. I won't give that away, but it was a bit more than $40 million. But here we are on opening day. Mr. Thompson is making his opening day remarks in the pool. And here's, just another glance back at what was happening over the last 5 years. I always told Mr. Thompson it's going to look a lot worse before it looks better. And he keeps saying, Greg, it looks terrible. When is it going to look better? But here it is, all finished up. And as a preservation architect, I think one of the best compliments I can get is if somebody comes to the building and says, what did you do to it? It looks just like it always has. That to me is the best compliment I can get. And I believe that's exactly what we accomplished here because the building looks like it did in the 1920s, yet still retains a patina of 80 years of use. And again, here's just the portico before and then after. There's a photograph of a postcard from the Atlantic. And then here's the after photograph. This pergola and garden was a new addition designed by the restaurant designer to have like outdoor dining off of the Becca's enclosed porch, and it's absolutely an exquisite outdoor space. Here's the lobby before. There's the historic photograph that we used for reference. Here it is in 2013, and here it is it's right after opening day. We couldn't get the paneling back to a natural wood. In fact, I think I like it better as this light color because the lobby was really quite dark. But you can see the plaster rosette. We restored that. We didn't lose any of that material. And again, all the paneling except for this portion right here was original and restored in the lobby. Just another view looking back toward the front door. And here's a view with our newly established openings to the check-in area, which is really quite a lovely check-in experience. You don't walk up to a counter, you're actually seated at a desk and they walk you through the check-in process. It's just a really lovely experience. Here's the Raleigh room before. You can see, again, a lovely room, but here it is with the fireplace restored, with its accoutrements. It's just an absolutely gorgeous room. And we added a bar to the Raleigh room, which was a bit controversial, but this is built like a piece of furniture, so it can be removed from the Raleigh room without destroying or damaging any of the historic fabric that is behind it. And that was our intent by putting this bar in here. So it can be totally removed, and all of the historic woodwork is behind it, restored, and just basically protected. The porches that wrap around it were probably the best transformations in the entire project. This is the east porch, looking over the ocean. Our interior designers turned it into a palm garden, and it's just, when those doors are open, it's just so delightful to sit out there. Here's the Raleigh room porch overlooking the south lawn. This is a more casual atmosphere. There's like chess tables and gaming tables, a really casual, fun atmosphere overlooking this lawn with a fire pit outside. I think this is one of the best transformations of the hotel. This is the Becca dining porch. This is what the restaurant designer came up with. We did keep the paint in this room because he wanted it to be light and airy. And now that the outdoor dining area is grown, this is 2 years old, has filled in, and the pergola is covered with vines. It's lush. It is absolutely lush. I had lunch out there a couple of weeks ago, and it was just delightful, absolutely delightful. Here's the pool before, just a glimpse of what we went through to get it to where it is now. So we got the whole volume of the pool's back, the skylight's exposed, you have the coffered ceilings, and it looks like it did early on. So it's just absolutely fabulous. And everybody I talk to knows about the Cavalier's pool. I mean, I think everybody in Tidewater of some age vintage learned to swim in the Cavalier's pool. Hunt room fireplace under construction. Here it is finished with a fire in it and the restored hunt room. Another view of that interior, looking the same basically the same direction toward the fireplace. And here's the distillery that you can see through the hunt room. And yes, that is blast-proof glass between the distillery and the hunt room. One of the secret rooms of the hotel is the lower level lobby. This was a place that was closed off to the public for years and years and years, and actually closed off with a wall that was providing access from the hunt room to the men's bathroom. So no one ever saw this. And this was like the retail corridor of the original hotel, with the barber shop, the hair salon, the changing rooms for the pool, gift shop, a clothing shop, and access to the hunt room. So we were able to open that back up, and it's access to the pool, to the fitness center, to the spa, to the hunt room, to the distillery. And we actually uncovered the original terrazzo floor. So yes, believe it or not, that's the same space. I think this is one of the best transformations inside the entire hotel, and gives new life to this space in the hotel that was dead before. The guest rooms, they were nice before, nothing to write home about, but now they have this sort of modern 1920s chic look to them, with some really groovy artwork and furniture inspired by the 1920s in material and design. And if you're lucky and get to stay in one of the 27 suites in the hotel, you get a really cool historic bathroom. So that's the story of the Cavalier Hotel. We got a few minutes left for questions and answers, so I'd love to entertain any if you have any.
Greg, that was fabulous. That poor hotel was in wonderful hands with you and your team.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to call you the hotel whisperer. You discovered all those things that you discovered. We have a few questions. One of them, do you know how a person would find out if the Cavalier has original registration records going back to, say, 1929, when it's rumored that one of our viewers' grandparents were on their honeymoon there?
Oh, I don't know, but the short answer is no. I don't know, but one of the Cavalier Associates designers, they had an in-house team who designed the museum that's in the Cavalier, at that knuckle between the two porches. He did a ton of research on this hotel, so he may have found something like that, and the Cavalier Associates had that in their archives. I just don't know that.
So contact the hotel and ask for information on how to contact the Cavalier Associates.
I would do that. I would give the hotel a call and say, I understand the gentleman's name was Gary King. Mr. King did a lot of research on the hotel. I'm looking at these kinds of records. Could you, maybe inform me if you had these kinds of records? Because they didn't. They're in files and files and files in a room over at their offices.
Okay, Gary King, got it. Thanks for the lead. The windows, those beautiful windows that you talked about with the transoms and the casements, was that part of Clarence Neff's work?
To the best of my knowledge, I'm positive they were. All the windows on the first floor, including the ones you see here in the ballroom, were original to the structure, so we maintained them. Even the ones that were on the dining porch as well. And you can see in one of those original construction photographs the frames for these arches being installed in that steel frame. So I'm sure he designed them. To what detail, I don't know, because at this point in architecture, the architect would basically do a drawing of his intent, and the craftsperson could take it from there.
Okay, well, it's wonderful you were able to restore them. Here's a historical context question. Do you know if there might have been some sort of economic or cultural component during the 1920s that drove the creation of other grand hotels? I mean, we have the Breakers and the Don Caesar in Florida, obviously the Cavalier.
Yeah, I think it even goes back to earlier than that, because before the Cavalier, like I mentioned, we had the Princess Anne Hotel in Virginia Beach and other hotels that have been lost. This is the last one of the great hotels in Virginia Beach still standing. I just think there was, especially with rail travel, there was these destinations where these things could pop up and sort of be like hubs of recreation and destination locations. I mean, this was, when you came to the Cavalier Hotel, it was an all-inclusive trip. You know, you were on what they call the American plan, and you could schedule tennis, you could schedule golf, you could schedule hunting, fishing, horseback riding. So these resorts were sort of all-inclusive. So I think they were kind of a draw as sort of like the early Club Med, so to speak. So there.
Okay. Yeah. I keep getting this message that says my internet connection is unstable. Makes me anxious. Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think travel and the railroad, we certainly know the Homestead and the Greenbrier were destinations for the railroad. The pool, is that seawater again? I know the original pool I had read was seawater.
It is a saltwater pool, but it's a chemically
saltwater.
Yeah.
Saltwater, huh?
Yeah, it is a saltwater pool.
Okay. Saltwater, great. Well, I'm ready to go there, if only for lunch. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I think we all learned a lot. I will tell you all that it is being recorded, so this program will be on our website, thanks to our webmaster, Jason Smith, who makes magic happen with these programs. Also, I can tell you that next month, our speaker will be, let me come back on. Next month, our speaker will be, can you make your screen share go away, Greg? Thank you. Next month's speaker will be Norfolk native Andrew Lawler. Andrew is a journalist who is a contributing writer to such publications as Science and Archaeology. He's also written for the New York Times, Washington Post, National Geographic, Smithsonian Magazine, and Slate. And he will be talking about his book, his 2018 book, The Secret Token, Myth, Obsession, and the Search for the Lost Colony at Roanoke Island. He has done research since then on Roanoke Island, and he has even more to share with us. So even if you've read the book, you will learn a little bit more on July 14th when we welcome Andrew to our program. He's also written a book called Why Did the Chicken Cross the World? But he will not be talking about that. And he may be able to share with you the research that he's doing now on history that comes even closer to Norfolk than the Lost Colonies. So I hope you'll all tune in then. And we'll see you on July 14th. Y'all stay cool and have a wonderful 4 weeks until we see you again. And thanks again, Greg.
My pleasure.
Bye.